Hello, this is Edith Newmeyer, and I am the author of the book, The Mystery of Adam. Today I'm going to talk about the Great Tribulation that Jesus talks about in Matthew 24. I have done studies about that before, but I have new people, and there's always people that continue to follow false teachings, and specifically the teaching of dispensationalism, because that's who really preaches that. And of course, other people as well. If they're not throwing out everything about dispensationalism, then they're going wrong. Okay? They're going wrong. So, and one of those things is the Great Tribulation. People are still extremely confused. And I ask so many times, well, show me, where do you find this word Great Tribulation, and where is it actually situated in the Bible? Where's it situated? Now, of course, Great Tribulation is exactly what it says. Great Tribulation, right? In other words, you know what tribulation is. Look it up in the dictionary. It's hard times, difficult times, could be persecution, could be even to the point of you being killed for your faith, could be deception, could be troubles, like, for instance, Satan is going after your children or your health. That's all tribulation. Think about what is tribulation. Just simply hard times is tribulation. Great tribulation is, of course, real bad hardship. Okay? Now, throughout history, people went through bad hardship. Now, the Bible tells us in Matthew 24 about a tribulation that is so bad that it has never happened before. Okay? Let me find that real fast. All right, it's in Matthew, of course, 24:6. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, earthquakes in various places, and these are the beginnings of the birth pangs. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and to put to death. And you will be hated by all nations because of me. And at that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And I'm still not where I want it to be. Let's see if it's sooner. I guess we should be continuing to read. So we need to read all the way to 21. For then there will be great distress, and he's translating it with distress. That's NIV, for Great Tribulation, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now. Okay? Did you hear that? From the beginning of the world until now. And never be equaled again. Okay? If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. And at that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. Okay? So you can stop this video and read everything until verse 28. Okay? Because that's what I'm going to talk about today. When will that happen? We know it. We know it. Some people believe that this great tribulation during this time that Jesus described is a great tribulation when? When? Well, they think it's after the rapture. However, people, it says here, no mistake, immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened. This is where the second coming starts. The day of the Lord starts with the sun going dark. Okay? So the tribulation is before the sun going dark, not after. So make no mistake. This tribulation time is before the return of Jesus. You got that in your brain. It's not after the return of Jesus. It's not after the rapture. It's before the day of the Lord. Now, of course, I believe that the rapture, the picking up of the bridegroom, will definitely happen before the wrath. So it happens between the wrath and between the tribulation. That is when Jesus will return for his bride. That's when the day of the Lord starts. However, make no mistake, the tribulation or the tribulations that Jesus described were the tribulations that the Jews went through during or before the destruction of the temple. How do I know that? It's very simple. What happens in the beginning? Jesus left the temple, and let's start reading from verse 1. Matthew 24. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him and called his attention to the building. Do you see all these things? He asked. Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. Okay? So he is talking about the destruction of the temple. Now some people say, oh, when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, there were still stones on top of each other. No, people. Okay? Don't make no mistake. The Temple Mount that is left over right now is Fort Antonia, or was Fort Antonia. It wasn't the Temple Mount. Everything at the temple is gone. We don't know where the temple stood. What we have left is the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount, what we call the Temple Mount, is Fort Antonia. How do I know? Because the Jews already did excavations next to the Temple Mount, and they found the remains of the temple. Okay? They just don't want you to know it. But if you do your research, you will find out. I was there myself, and I saw it. They are hiding it. They don't publicize it because they want people to believe that the Temple Mount is where the temple stood. But no, that's Fort Antonia. In reality, no, not one stone was on top of each other. Jesus talked about the temple that he just saw. Make no mistake. That's what he's talking about. The temple that the Jesus and the disciples looked at. He didn't talk about a third temple. He talked about the second temple. And he said, not one stone will be on top of each other. Okay? So then when they met on Mount Olive, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? Now, what do you think they're talking about when they're saying, when will this happen? Okay, because that's the first thing they did ask. When will that happen? When will the temple be destroyed? Okay, first question. Matter of fact, if you go to Luke 21 and Mark 13, that's the only question those two asked, or supposedly the disciples. Now, Matthew was not one of the disciples that actually asked Jesus. Okay? If you read the other accounts, you know which of the disciples actually were there asking the question. And Matthew was not one of them. Okay? He had it from somebody else. Because Matthew added a second question that the others didn't even ask. He added, and when will be, or what will be the sign of your return? Now, what does have the temple destruction and his return have to do with each other? Well, actually nothing. But Matthew thought it does. Okay? Matthew thought it did. Because during Jesus' time, the disciples actually believed that Jesus would return during their lifetime. And Paul addressed that in 1st and 2nd First Thessalonians 4 and 5 and 2nd Thessalonians 2. That's when he addressed exactly that false belief that Jesus will return during their lifetime. They thought they were already returning, and Paul said, no, don't be fooled. He has not come back. But Matthew, when he wrote Matthew, he thought that. So therefore, he made a connection between the destruction of the temple, because he thought that was the end. That's when Jesus will return, when the temple will be destroyed. Okay, so he connected these two questions or these two events together, even though there's 2,000 years in between. Again, read Luke 21, I think it's 24, and Mark 13 something, okay? Because he describes the same thing. But Mark and Luke, they only ask one question, okay? When will that be, the destruction of the temple? So then Jesus starts telling them about the destruction of the temple, and then later on he actually talks about his return. Now, when is he returning, people? Okay, how do we know when Jesus returns? What is the sign when Jesus returns? The day of the Lord, that's when he returns. Okay? The sign of the day of the Lord is the darkening of the sun and the moon losing its shine and the stars falling. Okay? All three gospels state that when the day of the Lord starts, when Jesus returns, that is when the sun goes dark. We also see that in Revelation 6:12. Same thing. And these people had that from the Old Testament, like Joel and Isaiah. They have that also. They learned that from these prophets, that when the sun goes dark and the moon loses its shine and the stars are falling from the sky, that is when the day of the Lord starts. It's significant for the day of the Lord. Okay? So when is that happening? In Matthew, in verse 29. Okay, verse 29, when it says, immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened. That is when the day of the Lord starts. Okay? Everything before that, he describes the destruction of the temple. Okay? Now, please get that in your brain. Jesus did not talk about a great tribulation that comes before the day of the Lord. Even though you can say from 29, immediately after the distress of those days, the days before Jesus' return is all distress. And we get that exactly, this information from Paul all the time in his letters. Even Jesus himself, he said, in this world you will have distress or tribulation. Jesus said that. All of us. If you do not believe that we are supposed to be having distress here, or if you don't have distress, then you are not a follower of Jesus. Because every follower of Jesus will go through distress, through tribulation. Now in Matthew, specifically in Matthew, he is not talking about the 2,000 years before the day of the Lord starts. He only describes let me finish this sentence, the time during the destruction of the temple. Why? Because the disciples asked Jesus specifically what the time would be like before the destruction of the temple. Okay? That's what the question was. And then Matthew is the only one who added, and your return. Okay? Because Matthew falsely connected his return with the destruction of the temple. But make no mistake, Jesus was only talking about the destruction of the temple. Now there's so many people that now believe, oh, wait a minute, no, the temple was not really totally destroyed. This is not that event. There's going to be a third temple that then going to be destroyed. No. He's not talking about a third temple destruction. Okay? And he's not talking about a third temple being rebuilt and that third temple having the abomination of desolation in it. No. The second temple was destroyed. That was the abomination of desolation. Okay? It's very simple. It's very simple. Now you're going to have to compare it to Luke and Mark. Then you will get a better understanding, because Luke and Mark is so much more easier to understand because they only asked Jesus one question. And that is about the destruction of the temple. Okay? So this is what we're reading about the destruction of the temple. I already started reading it. Right? Jesus answers, watch out that no one deceives you. And that goes for you as well. Okay? Don't let anybody deceive you. Don't let anybody talk you into nonsense. Because that is what the problem is. That we have deceivers out there that are interested in deceiving people. And the deceivers go back to where? Go back to the man of sin, the man of perdition that Paul wrote about before the return of Jesus. Before the day of the Lord, the deceiver will come. The man of destruction, or the man of sin. 2 Thessalonians 2. And he's the one who came up with this false teaching. So who is that man of sin who's already here? That's papacy. It's papacy. They came up with this dispensationalism. You can do the research. I have done many videos about it. Matter of fact, just recently I posted again something on dispensationalism. But here it is. Okay? Don't be deceived. For many will come in my name, claiming I am Messiah, and will deceive many. Now, people, do you see a lot of people coming today claiming to be Messiah? No. The Jews come up every year around Passover with a false Messiah. Every year. But there's not very many people running around saying, I'm Messiah. But during Jesus' time, or after Jesus' time, when Jesus was crucified, a lot of people came to claim to be Messiah. Why? Because they knew it was time. Daniel prophesied it, that Messiah would come exactly during that time that Jesus came. And of course, they rejected him. And so there was reasons for everybody else to come and claim that they're Messiah. Okay? That was normal for that time. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. That happened. During the time between Jesus' death and the destruction of the temple, which were about 30 years, there was many rumors of wars. Matter of fact, the Jews rebelled against the Romans severely, and they constantly had warred around with the Romans. It was horrible people. Okay, they tried to kick the Romans out. Of course, the Romans were much stronger. So yeah, there were wars and rumors of wars. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Now he's talking about the end. What end is he talking about? What end is he talking about? Now people can say, oh, the second coming. No, what did Jesus talk about? He is talking about the destruction of the temple. He's not talking about his second coming. Jesus never talked really about his second coming. He talked about the destruction of the temple. You read it again. Never did Jesus bring up his second coming. Matthew brought that question in. Okay? I'm not even sure if the original people that asked Jesus asked that question. Don't even know, because Luke and Mark doesn't. Okay? This is about the destruction of the temple. Nations will rise against nation and kingdoms against kingdom. There will be famines, earthquakes in various places. Famines. Now we know that the church in Jerusalem went through quite a lot of famines, and Paul actually asked the Gentile churches to collect for the churches, because they went through for the church in Jerusalem, because they went through a hard time. Earthquakes. I know for a fact there were many earthquakes during the time of Paul. Okay? I went to Turkey, and some of these places are in ruins. They were never rebuilt. And I believe one of them was the Galatian church. Okay? I know one of those churches in Asia Minor, which is Turkey, was never rebuilt. Others were. There were many earthquakes during that time. All these are the beginning of the birth pains. He is not talking about people. Something that will happen before the return of Christ today, the second coming. He's talking about the destruction of the temple. That was a very horrible time. Okay? The birth pains are just starting here. Rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death. Who did that? Saul or Paul did that himself. He persecuted the Christians in Jerusalem. You guys know that. This is all historical. You will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. That happened during that time. Okay? Because of these increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the ones who stand firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. In other words, during that time, they already preached the gospel all over the known world. Okay? And then he says, then the end will come. What end? He's not talking about the day of the Lord, the end of the world. He's talking about the end of Jerusalem. Okay? The end of the temple. So when you see the standing in the holy place, standing in the holy place, the abomination that causes desolation. Now, do you hear that? The abomination that causes desolation. What is desolation? Desolation is destruction. Okay? Destruction. So if you see people up there that will cause the destruction at the temple, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So he is telling the people, the disciple, hello, if you see something going on up in the temple, okay, that something will happen, you flee. You flee. Okay? Do not stay there. Why not, people? Do you know what happened in Jerusalem? Yes, we know it. You have probably never read Josephus. Okay? If you don't want to read a boring Josephus, I mean, he's not that boring, but he's just lengthy and it's hard to read, then read this book right here. Okay? It's called The Destruction of Jerusalem, an absolute and irresistible proof of the divine origin of Christianity by George Peter Halford. It's a very little book. Okay? I got it at Walmart. You also can get it for free. Okay? And I have it on my Facebook group, Great Deceptions of the End Times. You can find this free online. Okay? Read it. It's a summary of what Josephus recorded. Historical. He is a historical writer. He was actually experiencing and recording history. Okay? He was there observing. And he recorded what happened during that time. You need to read it. How horrible it was. Now, Josephus said that anything in history could compare to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Nothing. The Romans finally had it with the Jews constantly rebelling. And they went in. First, they had a siege with many people dying, some even eating their own children because they didn't have anything to eat. Yes, that's what Josephus did say. There were people that were predicting that this is happening, and they were actually beaten because nobody wanted to hear it. It was a very horrible time. The blood, it was so terrible, the blood was flowing down the gutters. Okay? Because of what the Romans did. So it was a bad time. If you think that wasn't Great Tribulation, it was. That's exactly what Josephus said. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible time. Never, ever happened before in history of humankind. Okay? And maybe it will never happen again. That's what Jesus said. But no, people think this is something that will happen at the end sometimes. Oh yeah, horrible things will happen, people. Okay? And I know Jerusalem will go through a horrible time again. But I don't think it will be as bad as when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. I know we can read it in Zechariah 14, that eventually at the end, Jerusalem will be again taken over, and the women will be raped, and people will be taken captive. But we don't hear that there's going to be such a horrible bloodbath in Jerusalem. It can get bad, I'm sure, because the wrath of God is probably just as horrible. But nevertheless, what Jesus described here is not about a great tribulation sometime before the return of Jesus. He described clearly here the destruction of the temple. And unfortunately, Matthew kind of was confused because he didn't think that it would take 2,000 years for Jesus' return. And he put the two events together, okay, back to back. And so people still believe today, they're confused today because they don't know about history, okay, because they're blind about history. They don't need to learn about history. They need to be ignorant. They don't want to know about it. They'd rather just follow false teachers instead of seeing and reading what's there. I cannot imagine people are so ignorant that they cannot read what's there. There is two questions that Jesus has asked. Two questions that Matthew supposedly is saying the disciples asked Jesus. One about the destruction of the temple, which is very obvious. Then why would Jesus not? That was Jesus' main concern. Then why would Jesus not address it? Okay? That's the one he addresses first, in detail. And then halfway through, he's going to address his return. Okay? But that's not until 29. 29, we see clearly the sun will be darkened. That is when the day of the Lord starts. Okay? There is no saying in the Bible anywhere. Okay? There is this period of time that's called Great Tribulation. No, it's just plain Great Tribulation. These people, during the time of the destruction of the temple, they went through great tribulation. Horrific tribulation. You just see, Saul dragged them in front of the fairs, the courts, and some of them were killed. We know that. It says, how dreadful it will be let's see. So we're saying that they were dragged in front of the officials, right? And some of them were killed. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet of Daniel, that is the destruction of the temple. Destruction, desolation, okay? Not some statue that was put up. Has nothing to do with the statue. No place is there a statue in this whole thing. No place. Or something. Idol, whatever. The Antichrist. It's all nonsense. Then let those who are in Judea flee. Let no one in the field go back and get their cloak. How dreadful it will be for those who are pregnant or nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will be taking place in the winter, not on the Sabbath. For then there will be a great distress, unequal from the beginning of the world until now, and never be equal again. Okay? If those days had not been shortcut, no one would be survived. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. And did you know, and this book says it too, none of the Christians was killed in Jerusalem. Because they had this, and they did flee. They had these instructions of Jesus. They recognized that's what this is about, and they did flee. Okay? That time, anyone who says to you, look, here's Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. Because that's exactly what happened. Remember, they were saying to Paul, well, did he already come? Did we miss him? And Paul said, no, don't be foolish. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, there is he out in the wilderness, do not go out. Or he is in the inner room, do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherefore there is a carcass, there is the vultures, there the vultures will gather. And this is finishing up his description of the destruction of the temple. Okay? Now compare that again to Luke and Mark. Okay? Now I know Matthew is a little not chronological. I mean, this is like you have 2,000 years in between now. This is exactly talking about the destruction of the temple. Okay? The first thing that Jesus said to them, okay, there will be the destruction of the temple. You have to know about it because you have to leave Jerusalem or you're going to be destroyed. What happened to those people that were not killed? Most people were killed. There was a bloodbath. Most people were killed. Okay? The young and the healthy, the strong they went into slavery. Okay? The old and the whatever, the rest of them, they were killed. All of them. And the rest were taken in captivity. The Christians made it out before all this happened. They went to the different places. We know that John with Mary went to Ephesus. They ended up in Ephesus. Okay? I don't know where everybody else went, but they all kind of scattered. But they made it out alive. And we need to understand that. And then in 29, this is when he's talking about the second coming, when he's talking about the day of the Lord. Okay? Immediately after the distress of those days. Immediately after the distress of those days. What distress is he talking about? Well, he is now talking about the distress of the 2,000 years. Because all believers are going through distress. Now, listen, people. This distress didn't just stop when the disciples had to flee Jerusalem and start, someplace else. No, they were continued to be persecuted, right? I mean, Peter died. I think most of them died. John didn't die, actually. I mean, a martyr's death. He was on Patmos until he was old. But all the other disciples, they died a martyr's death. Paul, many died a martyr's death. That means the persecution continued. It didn't just stop. The persecution continued until the Catholic Church was founded by Constantine. And then the persecution still continued for those people who did not join Constantine as the head of the church. Okay? So people still were persecuted after that. The persecution continued until even the Reformation. And even after that, the persecution continued. Actually, basically, the persecution continued until the United States was founded. That's how long the persecution continued. Yeah, the distress of those days. Okay? The distress of those days. Now, I know there's 2,000 years in between Jesus describing the things that happened during the destruction of the temple. Okay? I know that can be confusing, but it's only confusing if you do not read what's there. And if you're allowing yourself to have somebody else interpret the Bible for you. Don't interpret the Bible. Read what it says and use your brain. Okay? Use your brain and add some of the historical things to it. Okay? Now this guy did a really good job. He just kind of summoned up all the things that Josephus observed. Okay? So if you want to know what's going on, and you can find lots of stuff on the internet about the destruction of the temple. That's what he's talking about, all the way to 29. Okay? The first half of 24 is about the destruction of the temple until 70 AD. Until Judea was destroyed, the Jews were scattered all over the world. Judea was gone during that time. And then there's this big jump. Why? Because, well, there's nothing in between, because Matthew made this jump. Oh, destruction of the temple. The next thing that will happen is the return of Jesus, the day of the Lord. No, he didn't know. He did not know. So then he writes immediately after the distress of those days. He didn't know it took 2,000 years, but we know the distress continued. It continued throughout 2,000 years, and the distress is not over. We are under severe distress today. It's coming, people. You better wake up. It's coming. It's coming. No, the distress is not over. The distress for the Christians is not over until Jesus returns for his bride. Then after that, the wrath of God starts. Okay? Now the wrath is distress too, but for the unbelievers. Okay? For the unbelievers, not the saints anymore, not the bride of Christ. But I'm coming to an end, and I hope this helped. Again, go to my Facebook group, Great Deceptions of the End Times, and get, the link to the free copy. But you can also buy this little book. It wasn't very expensive. Like I said, I bought it even on Walmart.com. And I'm sure you can probably find it still. It's, of course, I don't know, the writer. Oh my goodness, this is an old book. 1805. It was first published in 1805. Okay, so somebody in 1805 had the right idea about Matthew 24. Why in the world are we in darkness today? Why have we been deceived so much? Because we have listened to false teachers. And those false teachers have totally deceived the believers and added sourdough into our churches. But people, I'm coming to an end. I hope this was helpful. If you got any questions, let me know. If you have, things you want to add to it, let me know. Please, people, give me a thumbs up if you like my videos, and also share them. Share them, because that's the only way I can reach more people with the truth. The truth, not with false teachings. It's so easy. All you need to do is read what the scripture says. And of course, you need to pray that the Holy Spirit will really guide you. Okay? Only the Holy Spirit can tell you. No false teacher or any teacher. I can only guide you and say, hey, read this and this and this and this and this and this. Okay? But you have to read it yourself. You have to study yourself. It has to make sense to you. And you can only get that through the Holy Spirit. Alrighty. Let the Holy Spirit guide you always.